Hi, beautiful people. Okay, so today we're going to talk about powers, and we're going to talk about special powers. So we're continuing what we did yesterday, but we're talking about the ones that have special names. So our essential question is, what are some special powers, and how do they relate to the world outside of school? So we're going to start with the special power of a square. Do you remember how I said anything to the second power is called squared? So a perfect square. Let's make a note in the side where we have a little bit of extra space that we said yesterday, 9:16, that a square is anything to the second power is called squared. So this means when we're talking about perfect squares, we're talking about something to the second power. Okay. So a perfect square is the square of a whole number. Okay, this means if you take any whole number and you square it, or you raise it to the second power, you're going to get a perfect square. So let's do an example. Five to the second power, or 5 squared, is 5 times 5, which is 25. So 25 is a perfect square because it's the answer to a squared problem. Okay? All right, so if we want to figure out whether or not something is a perfect square, so we're going to do example 3, because yesterday we did examples 1 and 2. Example 3 is going to address, is it a perfect square? So how can we tell if something is a perfect square? We're going to start with 64. Okay, is 64 a perfect square? Well, I'm going to think about it. Okay, let's brainstorm. 64 is a pretty big number. I know it's bigger than 25, and 25 is 5 squared. So let's try 6 squared. 6 squared is 6 times 6, which is 36. That's a little bit small. So let's try a bigger number. 7 squared. 7 squared is 7 times 7, which is 49. Let's try 8 squared. 8 squared is 8 times 8, which is 64. Hey, I found the perfect square root, or the perfect number, or the whole number that becomes 64. So 64 is 8 squared, which means yes, it's a perfect square. Let's try another number. Okay, this time let's try the number 20. Okay, now I'm going to use what I already know. I know from the example up here that 5 squared is 25, so I'm going to try something smaller because 20 is smaller than 25. So I'm going to do 4 squared, which is 4 times 4, which is 16. Now 16 is too small, and 5 squared, which is 5 times 5, which is 25, is too big, which means this is not a perfect square. Not a perfect square. Because perfect squares come from whole numbers. The only way I could get 20 is if I used a number that was not a whole number. I have to use something in between 4 and 5. Okay, before I give you a bunch of try-its, over here in the left-hand column, we're going to write some examples of perfect squares. Okay, so let's start with 1 squared. What's 1 times 1? 1 times 1 is 1. So 1 is a perfect square. How about 2 squared? What is 2 times 2? 4. 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. 4 squared is 4 times 4, which is 16. We know 5 squared is 25. Then we've got 36, 49, 64, 81, and 100. Okay, these are some example perfect squares so that you can use this to find other perfect squares. Okay.